Eleanor Vance held her wine glass by the stem, her fingers long and pale, a testament to a life lived far from manual labor. The crystal caught the light of the chandelier hanging over the mahogany dining table, scattering miniature rainbows across the starched white tablecloth. She looked at her son-in-law, Liam, and her lips curled into a smile that did not reach her cold blue eyes. It was a smile of supreme confidence, of a queen surveying a courtier she found mildly useful, but ultimately insignificant. "You must understand, Liam," she said, her voice a low, melodious purr that had disarmed more formidable men than him. "It's a matter of pedigree, of background. David needs this investment for his startup because the Vance name is attached to it. It requires a certain level of presentation." Liam placed his fork down carefully next to his half-eaten prime rib. He had been a silent observer for most of the dinner, a familiar role at these family gatherings. He was the sturdy, quiet foundation upon which his wife Sarah's family had built their comfort. But a foundation is, by its nature, meant to be unseen and unacknowledged. "I understand presentation, Eleanor," Liam replied, his voice even. "I also understand risk. $100,000 is a significant amount of capital for a business with no plan, no projections, and no product." David, Sarah's younger brother, scoffed from across the table. He had his mother's looks, but none of her practiced subtlety. His entitlement was a raw, gaping thing. "It's about vision, Liam, something you wouldn't get. It's a social networking platform for yacht owners. It's exclusive. It's a guaranteed success." Liam's gaze remained on his mother-in-law. "For 5 years," he began, his tone still maddeningly calm, "I have paid the rent on your apartment on the Upper East Side. I have covered your utilities, your club membership, and the lease on your car. I have done this without question because you are Sarah's mother, and that made you family." A flicker of irritation crossed Eleanor's face. The quiet man was speaking of vulgar things. Money, specifics. It was terribly middle class. "And we are grateful for your contributions, of course. But this is different. This is about securing the family's future, David's future." "And my future?" Liam asked, a genuine question. "The future I'm building with your daughter? $100,000 is not a contribution. It's a gamble with our security." This was it. The moment the carefully constructed veneer of civility finally cracked. Eleanor placed her glass down with a sharp click. The air grew cold. Sarah, caught between her husband and her mother, shrank in her chair, her eyes pleading with Liam to just stop, to just give in as he always did. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice losing its purr and taking on the sharp, brittle edge of shattered glass. "Let me be perfectly clear. You have provided a service. A necessary one, I admit, but do not mistake a transaction for a relationship. You were a means to an end, Liam. You gave my daughter a comfortable life, and you kept me in the style to which I am accustomed. But you were never, not for a single moment, family." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. They were designed to humiliate, to put him back in his place, to remind him that he was an outsider who had bought his ticket into their world, but would never truly belong. Sarah looked down at her plate, her silence a blade twisting in Liam's heart. He had absorbed countless slights, endured endless condescension, all for her. But her silence now told him he had been enduring it alone. Eleanor smiled, a real smile this time, a victor's smile. She thought she had won. She thought she had reminded the help of his station. She had no idea that the words, "means to an end," were not an insult, but a prophecy. She didn't know that the end was about to arrive, delivered by the very man she had just so carelessly discarded. Within 24 hours, the foundation she had taken for granted would be gone, and her entire world, built on the bedrock of his quiet generosity, would crumble into dust. If you've ever felt unappreciated or taken for granted by people who should have valued you most, then you know the feeling that was slowly beginning to solidify in Liam's chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a cold, hard clarity. Stick with me to see how this unfolds, and maybe let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to that dinner and the beginning of the end for Eleanor Vance. The silence that followed Eleanor's declaration was profound. It was a living entity in the room, absorbing the candlelight and the aroma of expensive food, leaving only a cold, hollow vacuum. David smirked, swirling the wine in his glass, enjoying his mother's verbal checkmate. Sarah remained motionless, a statue of silent conflict, her loyalty fractured and her courage absent. She wouldn't meet Liam's eyes. He didn't expect her to. This was a pattern, a dance they had perfected over the years. Her family would push, he would absorb, and she would stand perfectly still in the middle, hoping the storm would pass without her having to choose a side. Liam finally looked away from Eleanor and met his wife's gaze. He saw the apology in her eyes, the familiar shame, but he also saw the deep-seated fear of her mother that outweighed her loyalty to him. It was a look he had seen countless times before. It was the look she gave him when Eleanor had called his architectural work quaint and commercial, despite him having won a prestigious award just a week prior. It was the look she gave him when David had borrowed his vintage watch and lost it, and Eleanor had dismissed it as a trifle Liam could easily replace. Each time, Sarah's silence had been a small betrayal, a paper cut. But tonight, those cuts had bled together into a mortal wound. He slowly folded his napkin and placed it on the table. He stood up, his movements deliberate, not with the hurried anger they expected, but with a quiet finality that was far more unsettling. "Thank you for dinner, Eleanor," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion at all. It was as if he were addressing a stranger, a business associate at the conclusion of a failed negotiation. "I believe we have nothing more to discuss." He looked at Sarah. "I'm going home. You can stay, or you can come with me." Sarah looked from Liam's impassive face to her mother's triumphant one. The choice was laid bare. To stay was to side with them. To leave was to side with him. She hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. I should make sure my mother is all right," she stammered, the excuse flimsy and transparent. Liam nodded once, a short, sharp gesture of understanding. The cold clarity inside him intensified. He had his answer. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the opulent dining room, his footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor of the foyer. The sound of the heavy front door closing behind him was a gavel strike, ending a trial he hadn't even realized he was in. As soon as he was gone, David laughed. "Well, that was dramatic. He'll come around. He always does." Eleanor sipped her wine, preening. "Of course he will. Men like that, with no real breeding, are terrified of losing what they've managed to acquire. He's attached to you, Sarah, and to the lifestyle that comes with being connected to our family. He just needed a firm reminder of his place." But Sarah felt a tremor of fear. Liam had never been one for dramatics. He was a man of logic and structure, like the buildings he designed. His actions were always considered, his decisions founded on reason. The terrifying emptiness in his eyes was something she had never seen before. It wasn't the look of a man who would come around. It was the look of a man who had just made a final, irrevocable calculation. She looked at her mother's smug face and her brother's casual greed, and for the first time, she felt a sickening dread that they hadn't just won a minor skirmish. They had just lost the entire war. Liam drove home through the glittering streets of the city, but he didn't see the lights. He saw the past 5 years spooling out behind him like a reel of film. He saw the first time he'd met Eleanor, how she'd sized him up, her gaze lingering on his watch, his shoes, the cut of his suit, calculating his worth. He remembered his and Sarah's wedding, a beautiful, expensive affair he had paid for, where Eleanor had toasted to her daughter, finally finding the security she deserved, with no mention of love, partnership, or the man standing beside her. He remembered the day, a year into their marriage, when Sarah had come to him in tears. Her father's poor investments had finally caught up with the estate. Eleanor was about to lose her apartment, the last symbol of her vaunted social standing. Sarah had been distraught. She has nothing else, Liam. Her friends, her life. It's all tied to that place. And Liam, who loved his wife and believed that family was something you built, not something you were born into, had agreed without hesitation. He set up an automatic payment. He took on the burden because he thought he was protecting his wife from pain and building a bridge to her family. He hadn't realized he was only building his own cage, reinforcing the bars with every check he signed. When he got home to their quiet, minimalist apartment, a space he had designed to be a sanctuary of clean lines and peaceful energy, he didn't turn on the television or pour himself a drink. He walked to his home office, a room that Eleanor had once sniffed was lacking in personal touches. He unlocked a drawer in his steel and oak desk. Inside, nestled among blueprints and contracts, was a simple, leather-bound ledger. He opened it. On the first page, in his neat architectural script, was the date of the first rent payment he had made for Eleanor. Every payment since was recorded. The rent, the utilities, the car lease, the club dues, the emergency fund he'd given her when she'd overspent on a trip to Paris, the check he'd written to cover David's gambling debts. Each entry was a testament to his patience, a monument to his misplaced hope. He ran his finger down the latest entry. For 60 months, he had been their safety net. He turned to a fresh page. At the top, he wrote today's date. He drew a single, clean line beneath it, and then he closed the book. The ledger was balanced. The account was closed. He picked up his phone. He didn't call Sarah. He scrolled to a different name, a man he hadn't spoken to in months but trusted implicitly. His lawyer and old college roommate, Mark. Mark answered on the second ring. Liam, everything okay? It's late. I'm fine, Mark, Liam said, his voice steady. But I need to make some changes. It's time to restructure some assets. And I need you to draft a notice for me. Effective immediately. He looked out the window at the city lights, the same lights he hadn't seen on the drive home. Now they looked different, sharper, clearer, like a world coming into focus for the first time. The charity is being dissolved. The days that followed the disastrous dinner were thick with a strange, charged silence. Sarah came home late that night, her face etched with anxiety. She found Liam in his office, sketching on a drafting table under the cool glow of an architect's lamp. He didn't look up when she entered. He seemed entirely absorbed in the clean, precise lines taking shape on the paper. It was a design for a new public library, a project he was passionate about, a space meant for everyone, with no pedigree required for entry. Liam, she said softly, her voice tentative. He finished drawing a line before he turned to her, his expression unreadable. Sarah, are you okay? I'm fine, he said. It wasn't a lie. The turmoil of the previous night had settled into a kind of calm resolve. The path forward was clear, even if it was painful. Did you have a good rest of the evening? The question was polite, almost clinical, and it threw her off balance. She had expected anger, shouting, a dramatic confrontation. This quiet, detached courtesy was far more unnerving. No, of course not. Liam, about what my mother said. She was honest, he interrupted, his voice still quiet but firm. She told me exactly how she feels, and how she has always felt. I appreciate the clarity. She didn't mean it like that, Sarah insisted, the words sounding weak even to her own ears. She was angry. She lashes out. She meant every word, Liam stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. And you knew it. You've always known it. You just hoped I would never force you to admit it. He turned back to his drafting table, a clear dismissal. I'm tired, Sarah. I have an early meeting. We can talk in the morning. But they didn't talk in the morning. Liam was gone before she woke up, leaving a perfectly made bed and a silent apartment. The pattern continued for the rest of the week. They moved around each other like ghosts in their own home. He was polite, considerate, but distant. The warmth that had been the core of their marriage was gone, replaced by a chilling, professional courtesy. Sarah felt a growing panic. She tried to breach the wall he had built, bringing him coffee, asking about his day, suggesting they go out to dinner. He would accept the coffee with a quiet, "Thank you," answer her questions with brief, factual responses, and politely decline the dinner invitation, citing work. He was not punishing her. He was simply done. Meanwhile, Eleanor and David were operating under the confident assumption that they had won. Eleanor called Sarah every day, not to inquire about her daughter's marriage, but to ask when Liam would be coming to his senses about David's investment. "He's just sulking, darling," Eleanor said over the phone, her voice dismissive. "He's trying to make a point. Just give him a few more days to pout, and then tell him we expect the funds to be transferred by Friday. David has a meeting with the app developers." David, for his part, sent Liam a single, arrogant text message. "Ready to talk business when you're done with the silent treatment. Let me know." Liam read the text, a small, humorless smile touching his lips. He deleted it without replying. They were so blinded by their own arrogance they couldn't see the ground crumbling beneath their feet. They saw his silence as weakness, a prelude to surrender. They had no idea it was the quiet hum of a well-oiled machine preparing for a fundamental shift in operation. During that week, Liam was not sulking. He was methodical. He met with Mark, his lawyer, and they went over everything. He then met with his financial advisor. The automatic payment for Eleanor's rent was the first thing to be canceled. The notice Mark had drafted was simple, formal, and legally airtight. It stated that as of the first of the following month, all informal financial support provided to Eleanor Vance by Liam Hendricks would cease. It advised her to make alternative arrangements for her living expenses. Liam held the signed document in his hand. It felt heavier than its single page would suggest. It was the culmination of 5 years of quiet humiliation, of biting his tongue, of choosing his wife's happiness over his own dignity. He had made a promise to love and cherish Sarah, and he had mistakenly believed that promise extended to enabling her family's dysfunction. He saw now that true partnership meant protecting their shared future, not sacrificing it on the altar of her mother's pride. The most difficult part was the conversation he had with himself about Sarah. He loved her. He truly did. But he saw that their marriage, as it stood, was unsustainable. It was built on a flawed premise: his infinite capacity to absorb disrespect and her tacit permission for him to do so. For their marriage to survive, the entire structure had to be demolished and rebuilt on a new foundation of mutual respect. And that meant Sarah had to make a choice, free from the financial leverage her family had always held over them. On Friday morning, exactly 1 week after the dinner, Liam sat at his desk. The apartment was quiet. Sarah had already left for work, the distance between them now a vast, silent chasm. He looked at the leather-bound ledger, sitting closed on the corner of his desk, a record of the past. He then looked at the email he had composed, a gateway to the future. The email was addressed to Eleanor. Sarah was copied on it. The subject line was simple: important notice regarding financial support. Attached was the scanned PDF of the letter from his lawyer. He hesitated for only a moment, his finger hovering over the mouse. He thought of Eleanor's smug, dismissive face. He thought of David's entitled smirk. And most painfully, he thought of Sarah's averted eyes. He clicked send. The email landed, a quiet digital chime that would soon become a deafening explosion. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel anger. He felt only a profound, somber sense of release. He had finally stopped holding up a building that was designed to crush him. Now he would see what stood and what fell on its own. Eleanor Vance was enjoying her mid-morning coffee in her sun-drenched living room. The apartment was her sanctuary, a perfectly curated stage set for the life she believed she was entitled to. Every piece of furniture, every painting, every silver frame holding a picture of a more glamorous past was a testament to her superior taste. The fact that she didn't own any of it, that her very presence in this room was funded by a man she despised, was a detail she chose to ignore with practiced ease. Life was about appearances, and her appearance was flawless. She was scrolling through a high-end real estate website on her tablet, not because she needed a new apartment, but because she enjoyed critiquing the decor of other multi-million-dollar listings, when the notification popped up, an email from Liam. Her first reaction was a flash of triumphant satisfaction. He had finally cracked. The subject line, "Important notice regarding financial support," confirmed it. This would be his formal apology, his capitulation. He was likely writing to inform her that he had transferred the $100,000 to David. She smiled, took a delicate sip of her coffee, and tapped open the email. The body of the message was brief, almost insultingly so. "Eleanor, please see the attached document. It is a formal notice regarding the cessation of all financial support I have been providing. This includes, but is not limited to, the rent for your apartment, all associated utilities, club memberships, and vehicle lease payments. The final payment for this month's rent has already been made. All subsequent payments will be your responsibility. I suggest you begin making alternative arrangements immediately. Sincerely, Liam Hendricks." Eleanor blinked. She read it again. The words seemed to rearrange themselves, refusing to make sense. Cessation? Responsibility? Alternative arrangements? It felt like a language she didn't understand. Her heart began to beat a little faster. This had to be a joke, a bluff, a pathetic, clumsy attempt at negotiation. With a trembling finger, she opened the attached PDF. The letterhead of a prestigious law firm greeted her. The language was cold, legal, and absolute. It detailed the exact date the support would end, the first of the coming month, less than 2 weeks away. It was signed by Liam and countersigned by his attorney. The tablet slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the marble coffee table. The coffee cup rattled in its saucer. The sun streaming through the window suddenly felt harsh and interrogating. The beautiful, serene room began to feel like a cage, its gilded bars suddenly visible. Her mind raced, cycling through denial, then rage, then a cold, creeping panic. How dare he? After everything she had done for him, allowing him to marry her daughter, gracing his life with her presence, he was nothing before he met them, just another anonymous professional with a bit of money. She and Sarah had given him class, a connection to a better world. And this was how he repaid her? She grabbed her phone, her hands shaking so much she had to dial 3 times before she got it right. She didn't call Liam. That would be admitting defeat. She called Sarah. "Sarah!" she shrieked into the phone the moment her daughter answered. "Have you seen it? The email from that monster you married." On the other end of the line, Sarah was sitting in her car in her office parking garage. She had seen the email 10 minutes earlier. She had been staring at her phone ever since, the world dissolving into a low hum. Liam had copied her. He hadn't warned her, hadn't discussed it with her. He had simply acted. It was a unilateral declaration of independence, not just from her family, but seemingly from their partnership. "I saw it, Mom," Sarah said, her voice a hollow whisper. "Well, what are you going to do?" Eleanor demanded. "You have to fix this. Call him. Tell him he's gone too far. Tell him this little tantrum of his is over, and that he will transfer David's money and apologize to me immediately." I don't think he's going to do that, Mom," Sarah said, the reality of the situation beginning to dawn on her. The quiet, detached man who had been living in her house for the past week was not a man having a tantrum. He was a man who had made a decision. "Don't be ridiculous," Eleanor snapped. "You're his wife. He has a duty to you, and that duty extends to me. This is an attack on our entire family. You need to handle your husband." The phrase, "handle your husband," struck a sour note with Sarah. It was what Eleanor used to say about her own father when he'd had one too many brandies and started telling inconvenient truths at dinner parties. It implied Liam was a problem to be managed, a pet to be brought to heel. But Liam wasn't a pet. He was a man who had just shown her, in the clearest possible terms, that he was done being managed. "I have to go, Mom," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "I have a meeting." "A meeting? Your family is under attack and you're going to a meeting?" Eleanor's voice rose in pitch, bordering on hysterical. "Sarah, listen to me. Your entire lifestyle is at stake. Everything we have is because of my sacrifices and your good marriage. If you let him do this, it all falls apart. He will leave you with nothing." The call ended, but Eleanor's words echoed in Sarah's mind. "If you let him do this." As if she had any power in the situation at all. Liam had acted alone. He had cut her out of the decision, and in doing so had shown her just how little he trusted her to stand with him. The pain of that realization was sharp and deep. He believed she would have sided with her mother. And the most terrible part was, looking back at her years of silence, she couldn't say he was wrong. She had let him down, time and time again, and now she was facing the consequences. Her mother was facing her own, but Sarah knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Eleanor would see this not as a consequence of her own actions, but as a betrayal by everyone else. The reckoning had begun. It took less than an hour for the storm to arrive at their front door. Liam was in his office, calmly archiving files on his computer, when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite chime. It was a series of frantic, percussive jabs, as if the person on the other side was trying to punch their way through the door. He knew who it was. He had been expecting them. He walked to the door and opened it. Eleanor and David stood on his doorstep, their faces masks of rage. Eleanor's carefully applied makeup was slightly smudged, and a flush of red crept up her neck. David looked like a thundercloud, his jaw tight and his fists clenched. "How dare you?" Eleanor hissed, pushing past him into the foyer. David followed, slamming the door behind him. Liam closed his eyes for a brief moment, then turned to face them. He remained calm, his posture relaxed. He was no longer a participant in their drama. He was an observer. "Eleanor, David, I assume you received my email." "Your email?" David sneered, stepping forward until he was uncomfortably close to Liam. "You think you can just blow up our lives with an email? After everything we've done for you?" Liam met David's furious gaze without flinching. "What is it, exactly, that you've done for me, David?" The simple, genuine question seemed to short-circuit David's anger. He sputtered for a moment. We let you into this family. We gave you a chance to be part of something better. And I have paid for that privilege, haven't I?" Liam's voice was soft, but it cut through the tension like a razor. "Let's be specific. I've paid 60 months of rent on an apartment that costs more per year than most people make in 5. That comes to $360,000. I've paid for a luxury car you don't need, Eleanor, at a cost of another $60,000 over 5 years. Club memberships, another $50,000. Not to mention the $50,000 in gambling debts I covered for you, David, to keep you out of trouble with some very unpleasant people. Or the $20,000 for your last business idea, the artisanal dog biscuit delivery service that folded in 6 weeks. He spoke without malice, listing the facts as if reading from a financial report. With every item he named, the color drained from Eleanor's face, and the rage in David's eyes was replaced by a flicker of stunned confusion. They had never thought of it in concrete terms. To them, his money was an abstract resource, a well that would never run dry. "I have paid, by a conservative estimate, over $500,000 for the privilege of being in your family," Liam continued. "And last week, you made it very clear that despite that investment, I am not, and never will be, considered family. You describe me as a means to an end. I have simply decided to accept your definition. The means have now come to an end. This was the moral mirror. He was reflecting their own words, their own worldview, back at them, and they recoiled from the image. "This is about the 100,000, isn't it?" Eleanor finally said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and dawning fear. "You're doing all this just to be petty because we asked you for one more thing?" "No," Liam said. "This isn't about the money. It was never about the money. It's about a complete and total lack of respect. It's about the fact that in 5 years, you have never once asked about my work, celebrated my achievements, or shown a single ounce of genuine gratitude. You don't see me. You see a wallet. You see an ATM. And when the ATM declines a transaction, you want to smash it." He paused, letting his words sink in. The verbal chess match had reached its turning point. They had come in with emotion and bluster, expecting him to be intimidated. He had met them with calm, irrefutable facts. Then, just as they seemed to be processing the sheer scale of his financial support, he delivered the quiet bomb. "You see, you've always operated under a fundamental misunderstanding about me," he said, his voice dropping even lower, forcing them to lean in to hear. "You think of me as new money. You dismiss my work as commercial. You have no idea what I actually do you?" He walked over to a large portfolio case leaning against the wall of his office. He opened it and pulled out a large, rolled-up blueprint. He spread it across the wide coffee table. It was the architectural design for a massive, gleaming skyscraper that had recently become the new centerpiece of the city's skyline, the headquarters of a global tech giant. "The firm that designed this building," Liam said, tapping the title block at the bottom corner of the blueprint, "the lead architect, the one whose name is on the patent for the structural innovations that made it possible, that's me." He then pulled out another document, a financial statement. He didn't show them the final number, but let the multi-page document speak for itself. "You think I'm a moderately successful architect who got lucky marrying your daughter?" he said, his eyes locking with Eleanor's. "The truth is, my net worth is likely 10 times what your husband had at his peak before he squandered it. The $100,000 you demanded for David's yacht owner app. Eleanor, I donated more than that to the City Arts Fund last month as an anonymous gift." The revelation landed in the room with the force of a physical blow. The silence was absolute. Eleanor stared at the blueprints, her mind struggling to connect the quaint man she had always looked down upon with the visionary who had designed the most talked-about building in the city. David's jaw was slack. His demand for $100,000 now seemed not just arrogant, but pathetically, laughably small. Their entire perception of him, the foundation of their condescension, was a lie. He wasn't the one who needed them for status. All along, they had been the ones who desperately needed him for survival, and they had been too blind, too arrogant, too obsessed with the ghost of their own past glory to ever see it. The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it shattered and reformed in an instant. The queen and her prince were revealed to be nothing more than beggars, and the humble courtier they had just banished was, in fact, the king. The immediate aftermath of Liam's revelation was a tableau of shattered arrogance. Eleanor sank onto the sofa as if her bones had suddenly dissolved. Her face, which she had so carefully maintained as a mask of aristocratic poise, was slack with shock. The blue eyes that had always held such dismissive judgment were now wide and vacant, staring at the blueprints on the table as if they were a magical text she couldn't decipher. The world as she knew it had been inverted. The man she'd called a means to an end was the kind of man her late husband would have desperately courted for an investment. The kind of man who would have been invited to sit on the boards she so admired. David was the first to find his voice, but it was a changed one. The sneering confidence was gone, replaced by a desperate, grasping disbelief. "You're lying," he stammered, though the evidence was spread out before him. "This is some kind of trick." Liam didn't even bother to look at him. His focus was entirely on Eleanor. Do I seem like a man who tricks people, David? Or do I seem like a man who for 5 years has quietly and reliably paid every single one of your mother's bills without fail? Which of those two portraits seems more accurate to you? The logic was undeniable. His reliability, the very quality they had taken for granted and exploited, was the ultimate proof of his credibility. Suddenly, the door opened. Sarah stood there, her face pale, her car keys still clutched in her hand. She had clearly left work and driven straight home after her mother's frantic call. She took in the scene, her mother looking utterly defeated on the couch, her brother sputtering in disbelief, and her husband standing calm and resolute in the center of the room. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Eleanor's head snapped up. Seeing her daughter, her ally, her pawn, a spark of her old self returned. She saw a path to salvaging the situation. She would use Sarah, as she always had. "Sarah, darling," Eleanor began, her voice trembling, attempting to sound like a wounded victim. "Your husband, he's throwing me out on the street. After all I've done for you, for this family, he's being cruel, vindictive." This was the moment of truth for Sarah. The lines were drawn. On one side stood her mother and brother, representing a past built on appearances, entitlement, and the slow erosion of her husband's dignity. On the other stood Liam, representing a future, if they still had one, that would have to be built on honesty and mutual respect. For 5 years, she had tried to live in the no man's land between them. That land no longer existed. "Is that true, Liam?" Sarah asked, her eyes fixed on him, ignoring her mother. "Are you throwing her out?" "I am ceasing to pay for a lifestyle she cannot afford and has never earned," Liam corrected her gently. "I am ending an arrangement that she herself defined as a transaction. Her future housing is her own responsibility, as it should be. That is not cruelty, it is a natural consequence." Eleanor saw her daughter hesitating and pressed her advantage. "He's trying to punish me for asking for a small loan for your brother. He's trying to turn you against your own family." She stood up, walked to Sarah, and clutched her arm. "You have to choose, Sarah. Him or us. Blood is thicker than water." It was the worst possible thing she could have said, because Liam wasn't just water. He was the man Sarah had chosen, the man she had promised to build a life with. And for years, she had let her family dilute that bond, pollute it with their toxicity. Sarah looked at her mother's desperate, manicured hand on her arm. She looked at her brother, who was now staring at Liam with a new, calculating expression, no longer seeing a brother-in-law, but a potential investor he had just catastrophically insulted. And she finally saw them for what they were, users, enabled by her own cowardice. She gently pulled her arm free from her mother's grasp. "No, Mom," she said, her voice quiet but gaining strength with each word. "This isn't about him turning me against you. This is about you forcing me to see the truth. You said he wasn't family. You were wrong. He is my family. He is my husband. And I have stood by, in silence, while you and David have treated him with nothing but disrespect and condescension for 5 years. I let it happen, and that is my fault." She turned to Liam, her eyes full of tears, but for the first time in a week, he saw something other than fear in them. He saw regret. He saw resolve. "Liam," she said, her voice breaking, "I am so sorry. I failed you. I failed us. I was a coward, and I don't blame you for doing this. You did what I was never strong enough to do. You drew a line." Eleanor looked at her daughter as if she were a stranger. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I stand with my husband," Sarah said, taking a step away from her mother and brother, and a small step toward Liam. It was the longest journey of her life. "I love you, Mom, but I will not be a part of this anymore. You need to apologize to him. You both do." David scoffed, though it lacked his earlier conviction. "Apologize? For what? For telling the truth?" "For being leeches," Sarah snapped, a fire in her voice no one had ever heard before. For taking and taking and taking, and never once saying a genuine thank you. For thinking that your name makes you better than a good man who has done nothing but support you. You want $100,000, David? Get a job. You want to live on the Upper East Side, Mom? Figure out how to pay for it. The free ride is over. The reversal was complete. Those who had humiliated now stood humiliated. The silent enabler had finally found her voice. And the man who had been the family's quiet foundation had just proven he was, in fact, the entire mountain. Eleanor looked from her daughter's resolute face to Liam's calm one and finally understood. They hadn't just lost their benefactor, they had lost their daughter. And in that moment, the cost of her arrogance became terrifyingly, devastatingly clear. The weeks that followed were a painful but necessary education in reality for the Vance family. Eleanor, steeped in denial, initially believed she could weather the storm. She assumed it was a temporary spat, that Sarah would eventually soften and convince Liam to reinstate her allowance. She made a few calls to her friends, hinting that she was looking for a new, perhaps smaller place, framing it as a desire to downsize and simplify. She was met with polite but cool responses. Without the prestigious address and the ability to host lavish lunches at her club, a membership Liam had also canceled, her social currency plummeted. She was no longer Eleanor Vance, the elegant widow with the impeccable apartment. She was just another woman of a certain age, struggling to make ends meet, and her fair-weather friends had little time for that. The first truly undeniable blow was the official notice from her building's management company, slipped under her door. It was a formal letter stating that her lease would not be renewed and that she was required to vacate the premises by the end of the month. It mentioned failure to provide proof of income for the upcoming term. The cold, bureaucratic language was a brutal splash of water to the face. This was real. This was happening. Her next call was to David, demanding he help. But David was facing his own crisis. The app developers he'd been courting were, in fact, just 2 college students he'd promised a cut of the profits. With no funding, they abandoned the project. The few real investors he tried to approach had laughed him out of the room when they saw his lack of a business plan. Worse, without Liam as a safety net, his own precarious financial situation came crashing down. His credit cards were maxed out, a car loan was in default, and the friend whose couch he was sleeping on was about to kick him out. He had nothing to offer his mother but his own panic. Their desperation led to a volley of increasingly frantic messages to Sarah. Eleanor's texts swung wildly between manipulative guilt-tripping. "I don't know how I'll survive. I suppose this is what you want, to see your own mother on the street," and outright demands. "You are my daughter. It is your duty to care for me. You will tell Liam to fix this now." David's were more direct, a mix of pathetic pleading and veiled threats about how this would tear the family apart forever. Sarah, however, was a different person. The confrontation in their living room had been a crucible for her. Standing up to her mother for the first time had been terrifying, but also liberating. With Liam's support, she was finally building the boundaries she should have built years ago. She and Liam were talking again, really talking. The conversations were long and difficult, raking over the coals of the past 5 years. Sarah laid bare her fears, her feelings of inadequacy growing up in Eleanor's shadow, and her deep-seated terror of her mother's disapproval. Liam listened patiently. He, in turn, explained the profound loneliness he had felt, the slow-building resentment of being treated as a utility rather than a person. It was a painful process of demolishing the old, damaged structure of their marriage to see if the foundation was still sound. It was. Beneath the years of dysfunction, their love for each other remained, but they both knew it had to be rebuilt on new terms. Sarah established a new protocol for dealing with her family. She refused to engage with them via text. She scheduled 1 phone call with her mother per week, in which she was calm, firm, and refused to be drawn into hysterics. "Mom, I love you, and I will help you look for a new apartment that you can afford on your Social Security and the small income from Dad's trust," she said during one such call. "I will help you pack. I will not, however, ask Liam for money, and I will not allow you to speak ill of my husband. Those are the terms. If you can't abide by them, then we can't talk." The first few calls ended with Eleanor hanging up in a rage. But as the end of the month loomed closer, her calls became more subdued. The fury was giving way to a grudging, terrified acceptance. Sarah helped her mother find a small, one-bedroom apartment in a decent but far less glamorous neighborhood, miles away from the Upper East Side. The day they moved Eleanor out of her gilded cage was a somber affair. The grand furniture looked absurd and oversized in the new, modest space. As the movers left, Eleanor stood in the middle of her new living room, surrounded by boxes, and finally broke down. They were not the crocodile tears of manipulation Sarah was used to, but the genuine, ragged sobs of loss. She had lost her home, her status, her pride, and her control over her daughter, all in one fell swoop. Sarah held her, not as a cowering daughter, but as a compassionate adult. "It's going to be okay, Mom," she whispered. "It's just different." For Eleanor, different was a life sentence. But for Sarah and Liam, different was a new beginning. They were starting over, no longer defined by the expectations and entitlements of others. The air in their home was lighter. They laughed more. Liam no longer retreated to his office every night. He and Sarah would cook dinner together, talking about their days, their dreams, their future. He had finally been seen, and she had finally found her voice. The consequences of that one terrible dinner were devastating for some, but for them, they were the painful, necessary catalyst for building something real and lasting. Months later, the city was settling into the crisp beauty of late autumn. The skyscraper Liam had designed was a permanent fixture in the skyline, a silent testament to his vision and success. He no longer looked at it with a secret sense of pride, but with a quiet satisfaction he now shared openly with his wife. Their life had found a new, healthier rhythm. The rebuilding of their marriage had been methodical, like one of Liam's architectural projects. It required honesty as a foundation, communication as the framework, and mutual respect as the load-bearing walls. They went to counseling not because their marriage was broken, but because they wanted to ensure they had the right tools to build it stronger than before. Sarah learned to untangle her own worth from her mother's approval. Liam learned to voice his own needs before resentment could take root. Eleanor settled into her new life with a grim reluctance. She had to learn how to budget, how to take the bus, how to live without the insulating layer of wealth that had protected her from the mundane realities of the world. She complained often during her weekly calls with Sarah, but the sharp, demanding edge to her voice was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. She had been forced into a confrontation with the one person she could no longer manipulate, herself. There were fleeting moments of clarity, small admissions of fault, but a full-blown apology was still beyond her. Redemption, Liam knew, was a long, arduous process, and it could not be forced. For now, the natural consequences of her actions were a sufficient teacher. David had disappeared from their lives for a while. After a few more failed attempts to get money from Sarah, he had moved to another state, chasing another get-rich-quick scheme. His absence was a relief, a toxic branch pruned from the family tree. One Saturday afternoon, Liam and Sarah were walking through a park, hand in hand, the autumn leaves crunching under their feet. They passed a construction site for a new community center. Liam stopped, looking at the rising steel beams. "You know," he said, "the hardest part of a demolition isn't the explosion. It's the cleanup. It's sorting through the rubble to see what's salvageable, what can be used to build again." Sarah squeezed his hand. "And what did we salvage?" "Us," he said simply, turning to look at her. Her face was relaxed and happy, free from the constant tension that used to reside there. We salvaged the part that always mattered. The rest was just noise. He had made a difficult choice, one that had caused immense pain and upheaval. But it had been a choice for integrity, for respect, for the sanctity of the partnership he had with his wife. He had stopped paying her mother's rent not out of spite, but out of a deep and abiding respect for himself and for the marriage he was determined to save. He had lost a mother-in-law and a brother-in-law, but he had gotten his wife back. More than that, he had helped her find herself. The central lesson wasn't about the dramatic reveal of wealth or the satisfaction of seeing arrogance humbled. It was a quieter, more profound truth. True family isn't about blood or obligation. It's a conscious choice. It's a structure you build together, every day, through acts of love, mutual respect, and the courage to protect it from anything or anyone that seeks to undermine it. Liam had been willing to tear everything down to protect that principle. And in the quiet, sunlit peace of their new life, they were slowly, carefully, building something far more beautiful and enduring in its place. What they had now was not built on money or status, but on the solid bedrock of truth. It was a home, in the truest sense of the word, and it was priceless. This story is a powerful reminder that respect is the foundation of any healthy relationship, whether it's with family, friends, or partners. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop enabling behavior that harms everyone involved. It's about drawing a line not to punish others, but to protect yourself and the sanctity of what you're building. We've all faced situations where our generosity or kindness has been taken for granted. What do you think is the hardest part about setting boundaries with people you care about? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and insights are what make this community so special. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more content that explores these complex human dramas. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.